In this episode, Rob partakes of the bastard hogberry, we slip on some garbage mittens, and Noah makes a whale call.
Hoo-wee!
Welcome to Fax Machine. Hey guys, Emily here, as well as Rob.
Hello.
And Noah.
Hello!
In our usual positions around the mic with a bunch of facts that we can't wait to share with you. Though, I have to say, I feel like there's a slightly different vibe in here than usual. Do you guys feel that?
I mean, there's a little bit of a...
Sort of a little bit of
How would
a...
you describe it? Like,
We are the champions!
I was going to describe it as a basking in the euphoric afterglow of our stunning victory at last week's Science Friday trivia event kind of vibe, but Noah, I think you picked up on it too.
Thank
based
you.
on that. So yeah, on May 26th, the Bell House in Brooklyn had a really cool event they do annually called Science Friday Trivia. It's actually hosted by Science Friday, the podcast run through WNYC, and it just drew a crowd of beautiful nerds and people in science publishing and just general science enthusiasts and trivia enthusiasts. And we competed as a team, Fax Machine Podcast, and won. NBD.
Yeah.
You can't see, but I'm brushing off both shoulders.
That is also considering that, as is my custom, I strongly argued everyone else out of what would have been correct answers numerous times.
Yeah, listeners familiar with how we do in our own quizzes will
I
be...
was going to say, I feel like we're all like guilty of that to an extent, though, at least in our own quizzes.
It turns out that starfish are not apex predators.
Who would have known?
For anyone wondering, they are not. But yeah, so we did that and we won. It was pretty great. Big thank you to Science Friday and WNYC and the Bell House and everyone involved in making it happen. It was ludicrously fun, like we were just saying, and we came home with plush microbes and coupons for pie. I'm so excited.
And we only got square ones. You know why? It's because pi are squared.
The best puns are the ones that we just collectively dread.
Don't say it.
What is this going to be?
No.
But more importantly, over the course of the night, we learned a lot of really cool, interesting science facts that we were instantly curious to learn more about. So we did. And this week, we're bringing you a few fascinating facts based on our favorite questions from Sci-Fi Trivia. So, in usual fashion, we'll do that, then we'll wrap things up with a pub-style quiz loosely inspired by the theme. And actually, if you want to see more about our escapades at Sci-Fi Trivia, we documented them pretty extensively on our social media accounts, on Instagram and on Twitter at FaxMachinePod. So, without further ado, Rob, what have you got for us?
So this week I learned at Science Friday Trivia that archaeology is trash.
Rob, some of them might be listening.
Is that the sound of like 200 people just turning off the podcast?
Are there 200 archaeologists? No, let me put it in a different way. Some of the best archaeological digs are in garbage piles. And that's where hopefully our archaeologist hung in there to hear. Basically, the question that was asked was, what do you call a big pile of oyster shells? Because there's a word for that. There's a word that's used in marine biology and in the people who study oysters and oyster communities. And
I think we went with heap.
we did, and I was so mad because
So, yeah.
So in the context of my job, working in science outreach in New York City, teaching, I have used this term, talked to people about this term. I've even read a book like explicitly about oysters in New York, and I couldn't remember it. So we got this one wrong. And I wear that as
One of the few.
badge of shame.
No, there were many.
There are so many we got wrong.
Haunt us forever. It's fine.
But so this one drove me absolutely nuts because I had to look it up the second we handed in the score sheet. And so the term is a midden. And a midden is an archaeological term for any kind of pile of trash, any pile of human waste or refuse.
Before we continue, a spelling clarification on that. It's 2 Ds because I spent a good portion of Sci-Fi Trivia thinking we were talking about mittens, as in fingerless hand coverings. And I was like,
Yeah,
that's adorable.
So
Just,
how is it spelled?
Shells kind of look like that.
So it's Midden.
Right.
Yeah. But it does actually pose an interesting question about what it would mean to be a kitten mitten.
Oh no.
Anyway, so middens are archaeological piles of trash, basically. And they are some of the most fascinating piles of archaeological trash in the world. That was a dumb sentence.
I'm gonna leave that in.
But middens contain the history of lived experience of different cultures. And so middens cover anywhere in the world that had populations that ate oysters. And that was a lot of the ancient world. So to put it in context, there were middens found in diverse cultures anywhere that is basically oceanside. The early inhabitants of the United States, both coasts, Great Britain, most of Europe, and East Asia, all found historical oyster middens. Some huge middens exist in the United States. And in many places, middens are, again, just piles of trash and refuse. So people who ate oysters would throw out the shells, kind of the way that we throw away plastic bags and containers now, but they would do it with, other debris. There are some middens in the world that have no other debris. And archaeologists believe this means that the oyster midden actually had some kind of spiritual significance, that it was just purely oyster shells. And maybe the nacre or the kind of shiny part was something that was very important to them, and they wanted to keep it separate. So there's a lot of speculation about particular oyster middens. I want to draw attention, though, to the fact that the organic matter in those middens can be tested for the decay of radioactive carbon, giving us some timeline of the last 50,000 years of how people lived.
Oh, that's cool.
And so a lot has been learned from middens, like some of the tools that have been thrown away, kind of lost, literally dropped in the trash and then lost among the oyster shells. But this one I found absolutely fascinating. In Dobbs Ferry, New York, in the 1980s, they were planning a condominium development, and it was halted because they discovered an oyster midden. And archaeologists started to excavate it, and as they got down to the bottom, they found shells dating back to a time when they were eaten 6,950 years BC.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so a solid 9,000 years ago. It is to this day still the earliest human influence found in the Americas. But yeah, so using carbon dating, they've been able to date back middens that old and kind of all the way in between. So they used to scatter the East Coast, literally up the Hudson River, past the Tappan Zee Bridge. There were middens of all different sizes. Chesapeake Bay used to be largely surrounded by middens. There is the largest midden in North American history that has been slowly deconstructed and actually no longer is, but it's called Whaleback Midden in Maine. To give you the dimensions of this midden, it is 1,650 feet in length, 1,320 feet wide, and approximately 30 to 50 feet tall in different places.
That sounds like the ark in the Bible. I feel like for some reason, when you were giving me those dimensions, it's all sort of blurred together. But I just imagined you were saying it in cubits.
I mean,
it's right time period.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know about this one, but some of the old ones, I guess.
Well, yeah. So 7,000 BC is approximately
that's several thousand years before the world was created.
Yeah, oysters are actually the Big Bang happened inside an oyster.
Wow, ooh, that's a theory.
That's
It's just
cool.
oysters
Hot take
inside
right
of
here.
oysters all the way
All
down.
the way down, exactly.
All the way in.
That's why they say the world is your oyster.
Oh,
Hey!
nice.
I don't know. I just keep picturing actual mittens of all the dimensions and places that you've been mentioning. And it's been quite the ride, I have to say.
But 7,000 BC is Stonehenge. That's approximately the time we're talking about. And so the Britons built Stonehenge and we built big piles of oysters.
Stonehenge arguably
Yeah.
more impressive.
A little bit. But I mean, they didn't have oysters in the middle of Britain.
It's true.
true.
What else are they going to do?
But so Whaleback Midden, which is this massive midden, acres large midden in Maine, it fell into the hands, unfortunately, in the 1880s of the Dharmascotta Shell and Fertilizer Company. And the cool thing about oyster shells is that they are a natural repository of calcium. And actually, they're really, really good for hardening water. And they're even I know this because we just started a fish tank in my lab and use crushed coral as something to harden your water. Oyster shells can kind of act in the same way, and the calcium can be leached out.
So what is hard water? I don't know this concept.
Oh, so the hardness of water basically tells you about the not specifically salt content, that is the mineral content in water. And
So just like ion content.
yeah, ion
kind of.
concentration.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so typically calcium and magnesium are the two major ones that you're measuring. And it is a bioindicator, or it tells you basically about the availability of those things for biomolecules. Yeah, so very, very useful. And it's important if you have fish tanks, especially for shellfish, to have high hardness.
If you didn't, it would be very shellfish of you.
Yes. Well, so this giant midden fell into the hands of a shell and fertilizer company.
Fell into the hands. Like, come on.
Giant midden.
This is entrapment now.
But what they did was they whittled it down to make ground calcium supplements for chicken feed.
It's a whittle midden.
Jesus. But so it's no longer the largest midden. It is a national reserved site and it's protected. But the largest midden now in the state of Maine, pleasingly, is the Glidden midden.
Glidden midden. Really?
Yes.
Is Glidden a place?
Somewhere. Well, it's also on the banks of the Duramascata River in Maine. Duramascata.
Oh, okay.
Just a relevant observation. Maine is shaped like a mitten.
Oh, yeah.
That's all.
Isn't that Michigan?
Well, Michigan as well, but I'd say Maine.
Maine is the left.
Yeah, I'd say
Maine
it's like
is like a shorter
closed
thumb,
palm.
but it's kind of...
It's like you, Emily. Your short little thumb.
Wow, called out on the brachydactyly. Anyways.
Maine looks kind of like if you asked a child to draw a hand without like using their hand as a sketch, I think.
Yeah, it's like if you asked them to
Sure.
trace the outside of a closed hand.
Oh yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Like a hand turkey, but all frilled up.
Yeah. A cold turkey.
Do you guys know what the connection between oysters and margaritas is?
Oh, that red sauce.
Saltiness? No.
Isn't it oyster sauce?
What kind of margaritas are you drinking?
No,
have
I
a
think
red
you're thinking
sauce.
of marineras. I don't
Dipping
know.
mozzarella sticks into your margaritas.
So margarita comes from the Greek word meaning pearl. That's what it
no
means.
kidding.
And like pearls have this sheen, like you mentioned, like nacre, mother of pearl, and this sort of like pearly sheen. You hear the words like that. If you're thinking of iridescence, that's like what's going to come up on like the Wikipedia article about it. But there are other animals that have this quality of iridescence, and one of them is the Margaritaria nobilis. And the Margaritaria obviously is this pearlish quality, so you know that there's going to be something about it's a plant, in fact, that has this particular iridescent quality. The Margaritaria nobilis is known as the bastard hogberry. and I swear I've never heard a more beautiful sounding genus species name like Margaritaria nobilis degenerate so quickly to
Exactly.
bastard hogberry.
Not so nobilis now, are we?
Yeah, exactly. But the bastard hogberry is a fruit-bearing plant that's found, in Mexico, Central America, South America, and throughout the Caribbean as well. The fruit is this like bright metallic blue color, and
I've seen these.
yeah, isn't it cool?
They're really cool.
And so what causes this color is not some pigment, but rather it is a complex like surface structure that makes the light sort of reflect off it in interesting ways. So the way this works was worked out by a group at Harvard that also published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or PNAS, our favorite journal, on an unrelated plant that has a very similar effect. The Pollia condensata, the berries of which have that same metallic blue, but also they have these like tiny dots of like shiny red, green, and purple as well. And it's really beautiful, and I encourage you to look it up. But basically the way it works is this protein called collagen in the cell walls of the berry in this plant. They're organized in these layers. And so when light strikes it, it'll be reflected off the first layer of collagen. Some light will get through, and it'll be reflected off the second layer and the third layer, etc. And as the light that gets deeper is reflected back out, it interferes with the other waves of light, and then they create sort of different colors that look like they're multiple weird, interesting, shiny colors at the same time.
And the structural color, right?
So it's called structural color, exactly. And it's thought of as a strategy for biological mimicry, whereby like imitating the appearance of like a fresh fruit that is actually blue that an animal might want to eat, because a lot of these plants use animals that eat their berries as sort of like seed dispersal. So the animal like eats the berry, it's like, this is delicious, so it eats it because it knows it tastes good, and it can get like from the pulp and the flesh of the fruit it can get like energy, and then it like poops out the seeds, and the seeds are distributed as the animal walks around, and that's how the plant sort of like gains new territory. But these fruit don't taste good. And so they've evolved this sort of like this quality that they mimic that sort of that blue color that the animals associate with a tasty berry, but they taste like shit. And then so the animal eats it anyway, and it's just like, bah, I don't like that. But the animal can't sort of like evolve not to like them, because all the other berries that they need to eat are also blue. So it's just this like really interesting interplay between like the way berries look and animals pooping out seeds.
So, but animals can't recognize after that first encounter where they're like, "Oh, this is gross." Like they can't distinguish those berries from actually
No. So
blueberries.
I guess the idea is that it looks just enough like the ones
Wow.
they like that on some, some equilibrium between eating them and not eating them, they eat enough of them to disperse the seeds. Yeah.
That's also the same structural, that same structural color as what gives bugs that are iridescent, dragonflies and many
Yeah.
other flies. They're kind of shininess.
Not to mention, other than bugs, like peacoks.
Yeah.
They're
What do you call it? The plume of the
in the
peacock.
feathers,
Yeah.
in the barbs. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's super cool.
So, your fact is about oysters, and I love oysters, so I was like, I'm going to focus on those to look up some facts. And the first thing that I stumbled upon was a great mental floss list of oyster facts, just because its title was 15 Shocking Amazing Facts About Oysters, which I will say I'm not going to mention any facts from that list, but the name was pretty cool. But I will say, by way of that list, I learned about an old wives' saying that I hadn't heard before. So it goes, only eat oysters in months that contain the letter R in
yeah.
their name. You've heard that?
Yeah.
Right?
Does that have something to do with like whether they'll make you sick or something?
Yeah, so it was a combination of things. So that leaves you to like September through April is when you can actually eat them by that saying. But as you mentioned, the reasoning from olden times was that because they were purely harvested from the wild back then, two reasons. One being that the summer is when they spawn. So basically, like oysters will eject their gametes into the water.
Ew.
Like, yeah, I know.
No, it's super cool. It actually is really cool to watch.
Okay, well
I
there
mean,
we go.
it's kind of voyeuristic too, I guess.
But essentially, during this season, like after they spawn, they're kind of deflated and they don't taste as good.
Yeah, I mean,
So that's
you would be too.
So that's part of the reasoning for this advice.
It's really good to know if any other animals are out there that eat humans, and they're like, "Well, you can't do it." It's like, quick, it's a bear. What do I do?
You look tasty, human. Not anymore. This week I learned that there's a lonely whale out there named 52, whose song is just a little out of the ordinary.
Sounds like a children's book.
It really does.
It is, and like most children's books, it will start with a lonely and sad animal that is different. And Soviet submarines. Here we go.
I think you took away a very different message from those books than I did.
So, where this fact comes from at Sci-Fi Trivia, there was this whole round of basically like sounds that we had to identify, and they were all
They're all from the planet Earth,
yeah. So they were
Yes.
yeah,
which
okay.
seems broad, but actually eliminated a lot of good
It sure
guesses.
did, yeah.
Yeah.
And so basically, we and basically everyone else there maybe got one. I think most of you probably got
It's
none of them
zero,
right out of
yeah.
like 10. The one we did get right was not this one. It was a question. I just had remembered that there was some news article like a million years ago, as soon as this round came up, about how like dunes make a noise. And I was just sure that dunes was going to be an answer. And so basically we just put dunes for like a ton of them. Yeah. And then one of them was dunes and nobody got it except for us. And then we just lost our minds.
Yeah,
which was
pretty much.
probably from the outside looked a little crazy and we apologize. But basically I just stood up and I was like, dunes!
I was
But, yeah.
so down on dunes. I was like, "What are you talking about? They don't
It's not
make
gonna
any
be
noise."
dunes, bro. It's never dunes. Showed you.
Stop trying to make dunes happen.
It's never gonna happen. But it did. And that was great. But one of the other ones we didn't get was about this whale. And it was this that was known in the news as the lonely whale. So in 1989, a team of biologists from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, known by the acronym, which is genuinely meant to be pronounced woo-wee. I swear to God, look it up. I swear to God, it's WHOI. If you look on Wikipedia, it says pronounced woo-wee.
Those hippies.
Yeah. Anyway, in 1989, some biologists from Hui heard an unusual sound in the North Pacific Ocean, and it had the like repetitiveness and relatively low frequency that characterizes whale song. But it was about 52 hertz, which is in fact considerably higher than most whale song, particularly compared to the blue whale, whose song ranges from about 10 to 40 hertz, and the fin whale, which comes in around 20 hertz. So before that, they didn't really know what was causing it, but it really seemed like the call of a whale, and just not one that anyone recognized. Another weird thing is that they only ever heard one call. That same 52 hertz call, and then silence, as if it were waiting for a reply, and no reply ever came back. But 52 sure did. Sometime between August and December, it would come within range, and sometime between January and February, it would leave, racking up a daily distance traveled of between 32 and 69 kilometers.
Hey!
Yeah.
There we go.
So
The only reason to use kilometers on this show.
yeah. So important to this story is that of the Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS, SOSUS, a chain of underwater listening posts that the U.S. Navy had installed to hunt for Soviet submarines. It turns out, however, that Soviet submarines sound quite a lot like whales. So I imagine that quite a lot of time in the Navy was spent trying to figure out whether that sound was red or blue, so to speak. But by the end of the Cold War, SOSUS was declassified and opened up to scientific institutions, and all of a sudden, we had a vast array of sophisticated underwater listening equipment that was able to track whales all around the world. So back to hooey. So with the help of SOSUS, they recorded the 52 hertz whale every year for the full 12 years of the study, and the results were published in the journal Deep Sea Research. And all of a sudden, this, interesting story about an anomalous whale was picked up in the press, and the lab started getting nonstop requests for interviews, all with questions along the lines of, is this whale sad and lonely? And it became this worldwide phenomenon that, a lot of people latched onto, because basically we're all just sad and lonely, and misery loves company. But people, basically thought it was really cute and identified with this notion of it roaming the vast ocean looking for a mate, with no idea that its song was just a little bit wonky and getting no reply. But it's worth mentioning that scientists don't actually know that it is lonely. They just know that they've never heard a different whale make a song at that particular frequency. Some possibilities are that it's totally fine, and that other whales of its species don't care that 52 sounds a little funny. It's not like this is so ridiculously out of their range that they wouldn't be able to hear it. They might just think, oh, that, whale, that guy, actually we do know that it's male based on the pattern it makes. It just sounds a little wonky, and that's okay. We're going to appreciate him despite his differences, right? That's the best case scenario. Alternatively, it might be deformed in some way that impacts the song-making apparatus in its body, and it also might be a hybrid between a blue whale and a finback whale, which is rare but not, totally unheard of.
I don't know. I feel like this whale needs a rom-com treatment.
I feel like it does.
Netflix, if you're listening, this is a freebie.
This
Make
has
it happen.
Disney written all over it.
I guess technically Disney Pixar has already done a movie with whales in it, because Finding Nemo, and I kind of just wonder if what they're really picking up is Dory speaking whale. Do you guys remember the part where she's like, you speak whale? It's like, yeah, I do. Hello. How are you doing?
I'm sure the listeners loved that.
Honestly, I wish you could see the waveforms themselves.
Nice.
Different than the way you speak.
Well,
sense.
we were speaking whale.
Very effectively.
So he basically might just be normal, but chooses to be different? Are we saying that?
Oh, I see. So he could sound normal.
Yeah.
But he chooses to make that weird sound so he can stand out from the crowd.
Okay.
Exactly.
It's a rebel whale. I like it.
I could see this whale's parents just being like, why do you do that?
I'm not a part of your system. My song is higher than yours.
Turn down your newfangled whale songs now. Can't tell me what to do.
Normal.
Yeah, exactly. So I must say, though, that this is, even 52 hertz is incredibly low, and 52 hertz is roughly the lowest note that a tuba can make.
Wow.
Wait, so
Maybe it's painful to the other whales. Maybe 52 hertz.
oh my God.
Anyway, I just thought that this discussion about whales was great for a podcast.
There it is. At Sci-Fi Trivia, I learned the Northern Lights have a soundtrack that we can hear on Earth.
Ooh.
So this also came in the aforementioned sounds-based round that we didn't do well in overall, but we got Dunes, and really, what else do you need?
Dude!
To remind you, we cheered for it a lot. So I will say that although this week's fact primarily concerns events that happen in the sky, I figured before we get too deep, it might be good to lay a little groundwork. So the northern lights are a type of celestial phenomenon known as an aurora. And auroras are mostly visible in the night skies closest to the Earth's poles, so the Arctic and the Antarctic, where they're referred to as the aurora borealis, or northern lights, and the aurora australis, or southern lights, respectively. And auroras are produced by solar winds that disturb the magnetosphere, thereby accelerating and changing the trajectories of charged particles like electrons. Now, these electrons then wander down to the poles, guided by the Earth's magnetic field, and into the upper atmosphere, where they bump into atoms and molecules of elements like hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. And when these collisions occur, the electrons transfer their energy to these atmospheric atoms, causing them to get excited or reach a higher energy state. These atoms then shed this excess energy to restore their previous lower energy states, and in doing so, emit the energy as visible light, much in the same way that neon atoms do in neon lights. So while these light shows are typically concentrated to the poles and actually centered above them as auroral ovals, disturbances to the magnetic field caused by geomagnetic storms can actually extend the range of these ovals to lower latitudes, which is why on rare occasions we can actually see auroras from the States. So not at the poles. And actually one occasion where this happened that I remember really vividly. So do you guys remember the auroras that you could see in October 2003?
No.
Were you guys around for that?
Vaguely remember.
I mean, you were
hearing.
definitely around for that. But
I was 11.
11? Okay, I
Rob
was 12.
just turned 30.
Rob is ageless. But so this was at the end of October 2003, and it was actually caused by a coronal mass ejection. So that's basically a solar storm in which plasma is ejected from the sun's corona. No big deal. And it produced northern lights that could be seen as far south as Florida and Texas. And I just have like a very strong memory of standing in my front yard, just like in my house in Massachusetts, just looking up at the sky and seeing like a swath of like bright highlighter pink, like bright fuchsia pink, just sort of like glowing and almost like moving around in faint swirls. And like after that, I just kind of couldn't stop looking at the night sky ever since. So it's a very, very pleasant memory. Still to this day, I think the most beautiful thing that I've honestly ever seen in my life.
Wow, I can't believe you would say that sitting across from me and Rob.
I got to knock you guys down a couple pegs every once in a while. Especially after we won sci-fi trivia,
I'm so sorry.
Of course.
I'm so sorry for that again.
Unleashed a monster.
We're definitely going to need a bigger recording studio for these egos we now have.
Honestly, it's getting a little cramped. But I will say, so I remember this solar storm as just a bunch of pretty lights in the sky. But in reading back to articles that were published at the time that it happened, it actually also caused a lot of really interesting and crazy problems. So it destroyed NASA instruments. The geomagnetically induced currents messed up electrical transformers, causing widespread blackouts in Sweden. It disrupted GPS used by the FAA to direct planes, which, they kind of need that to keep the planes from crashing into each other. And apparently it could have also had really devastating effects to us on Earth. And I actually learned a bit more about this in reading a really interesting article from New Scientist that came out in 2009 that sort of paints a picture of what the worst case scenario could look like. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from that just to really set the scene here. It is midnight on September 22nd, 2012, and the skies above Manhattan, so getting really real here, are filled with a flickering curtain of colorful light. Few New Yorkers have seen the aurora this far south, but their fascination is short-lived. Within a few seconds, electric bulbs dim and flicker, then become unusually bright for a fleeting moment. Then, all the lights in the state go out. Within 90 seconds, the entire eastern half of the U.S. is without power. A year later, and millions of Americans are dead. Like, I shouldn't laugh at this, but it just got, it just got really bad really fast. And the nation's infrastructure lies in tatters. The World Bank declares America a developing nation. Europe, Scandinavia, China, and Japan are also struggling to recover from the same fateful event, a violent storm 150 million kilometers away on the surface of the sun. So anyways, back to lighter topics. In 2012, a group of researchers in Finland's Aalto University confirmed centuries of folklore by capturing sounds made by the Northern Lights. The Auroral Acoustics Project recorded auroral audio from 2000 to 2012, an 8-second excerpt of which can actually be heard in a video from Aalto University's YouTube channel, which, seeing as this is a podcast, I'm sure we can get the audio in here somehow. So we'll see if that actually happens. It sounds kind of like a clap or a crack, like a crack of lightning. And Northern Lights observers have reported hearing it as a sort of faint hiss or static sound, though, conversely. But it was previously thought that the difference in electrical charge between the ground and the air, which is amplified during an aurora, could result in audible discharges of energy from tall, pointy objects on the ground like trees. So think of the kind of crack of static electricity when it jumps from a doorknob to your fingertip.
Or isn't that also like St. Elmo's fire, too?
Oh, on ship's
Isn't that something
masts?
similar? With that green light that comes off the ship?
Yeah, it's plasma. Yeah.
Interesting.
Same idea. Yeah. But the group at Alto, since learning that these noises originate from a source considerably above the tree level, they've actually posed an alternate hypothesis. So auroral sounds emanate from about 250 feet above the ground, which overlaps with an atmospheric region known as the inversion layer. And it's so called because at this height and during certain weather conditions, the air temperature actually increases with altitude, which is counterintuitive. You think of climbing up mountains and they have snow because it's colder up there. Not so the inversion layer. And this can happen when a warmer air mass or a warm front passes over cooler air closer to the surface, or in situations where heat or radiation that's being exuded from the Earth is greater than that it's receiving from the sun, which most often happens at night or during the winter when the sun is lower in the sky. And since the poles receive exceptionally little sunlight, relatively speaking, inversions and inversion layers are nearly always present over polar landmasses during the winter, aka peak aurora viewing and occurring season. So another thing to mention here about inversion layers is that they can be broken by things like geomagnetic storms, resulting in a mixture between the areas of warm and cool air, as well as collision between positive charges above the layer and negative charges below, which results in thunderstorms and weird noises, like those produced by auroras. So I mentioned before that aurora noises have been observed anecdotally for a long time, and actually it even crops up in indigenous folklore. I found an excerpt from The Labrador Eskimo, a 1916 account written by anthropologist Ernest W. Hawks that describes the Eskimos' belief that auroras are actually sent by their ancestors to guide the souls of the recently departed into heaven. Of their sounds, he wrote, "The whistling, crackling noise which sometimes accompanies the aurora is the voices of these spirits trying to communicate with the people of the earth. They should always be answered in a whispering voice." Yeah, and I have to say to me, just reading that's absolutely beautiful and kind of reminds me too of sort of the awestruck and wonderstruck feeling that I had in seeing an aurora that one time back in 2003 before I knew that it could actually kill me, but young and naive. But I will say though that I don't know. I mean, that was just beautiful. But also in reading sort of different accounts of what auroras sound like, they don't just make one sound based on these accounts. As I mentioned, they were recorded to clap or crack, but people have mentioned that they sound like static or fuzz or even whispering. But I have to say that my favorite of their sounds is the clapping. It kind of makes the Northern Lights a celestial performance that applauds its audience.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah. All right, so for this, our Science Friday themed episode, I had the very original idea of writing this week's trivia round about Science Friday. So basically, I dove into their online archive and selected a few stories from their radio segments to highlight in this week's quiz, which, as they say on their website, covers the outer reaches of space to the tiniest microbes in our bodies. Point being, we are covering a very broad territory here, so I'm sure you guys will know lots of stuff.
And one that, as we found out at trivia last week, we don't know very much about.
But we don't know very much, but we know more than everyone else.
That's really all we need. And with that vote of confidence, question 1. So Science Friday once interviewed Dr. Jesus Tepena, a kinesiology professor at Indiana University, about his studies on the biomechanics of what track and field sport, which over the years has used techniques with names like the scissors, the western roll, the straddle, and the Fosbury flop.
Oh, yeah.
That's
high
jump, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
The old Fosbury flop.
Yeah. So you guys know this story then?
Why don't you tell us?
Sure. So up until the 60s, the most commonly used technique to get over the bar was the straddle. And essentially it looks like just planking over the bar. So your chest is like right above it and you just sort of whoop your way right over. That was until a guy named Dick Fosbury came along and started doing it the current way that we actually see high jumps actually happening. So arching your back over the bar. And basically he did it for a while and it was just kind of like a weird of thing. They're like, yeah, this guy's trying this. But it wasn't until he actually did it in the 1968 Mexico City Olympics and won that shifted the paradigm. And now we jump over the bar the way that we currently do. So the guy who was interviewed for this, Dr. Jesus de Pena, he studied the high jump for 30 years, filming athletes to understand how they produce the forces that they need to actually clear the bar. And currently the world record for the high jump is just over 8 feet. So to picture that, basically jumping over a stop sign with a foot to spare.
Wow.
So the forces required to do that are pretty spectacular. Question 2. Featured on Science Friday, the High Seas Project observes crews of volunteers in a habitat designed to simulate what experience? So I can give hints if you want them,
isn't
but I'll
that
let
the
you
one
ruminate for a bit
that
first.
is like long-term like Mars cohabitation and like studying them for like the psychological effects of cohabitation while they're doing all these different like experiences?
Yes, that is the one. So High Seas is short for Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation.
And it's like on the side of a volcano,
Yeah.
or something, because they
On the
want to
slopes
mimic
of
the
the
sort of like
Mauna
rocky.
Loa volcano
Yeah.
in Hawaii because it has Mars-like features.
Isn't Mauna Loa also like one of the tallest volcanoes or something?
Mauna Kea, I think,
Mauna Kea, I
is.
think
Mauna
that's
Loa
it.
is the observatory, though. I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's Loa than Mauna Kea.
Eh.
So as you mentioned, the purpose of this project is to determine basically what's required to keep a spaceflight crew happy and healthy, both in terms of sustaining themselves like physiologically, but also mentally, during an extended mission to Mars and while actually habitating on Mars. And actually kind of a fun thing that I saw in this too. So the participants, because they're kept or they live in an analog habitat. They kind of are though. They're restricted, but they're referred to as analog nuts because it's an analog habitat. And so far, they've done 6 of these projects, extending over various periods of time. And I will say that High Seas 4 lasted a full year and is featured in one of my favorite short-term podcasts that's ever been made, called The Habitat, put out by Gimlet. So plug for The Habitat. It's super good. Everybody go listen to it. Okay. Question 3. Science Friday featured Rockefeller microbiologist Dr. Rebecca Lansfield's recipe for what, which was and still is prepared weeks in advance of the department's holiday party.
This is the eggnog, right?
As we've
Good.
mentioned on the podcast before, in fact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, if you didn't get this one, that would be a
Circling
problem.
back.
This
But
was
yes,
in our
that
this
fact
was in our
already from Science Friday.
this
so
was
we're
in our
already-
holiday themed episodes.
Yeah.
Have
so we're-
yourself a merry little podcast.
Exactly.
Oh,
So we
yeah.
were showing them some love even back then and all the time. Question 4. An exceptionally punny segment of Science Friday investigated the physiological events underlying what medical condition named after a dried fruit?
Oh,
So admittedly,
Okay.
thinking about it, condition might be not quite the right word 'cause it's
Oh,
not
is it-
it's not a pathology, it's a phenomenon.
I get pruny fingers.
Pruning of the skin. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. Perfect.
So what were the puns?
So, well, the title of the segment was Getting a Handle on Why Fingers Wrinkle, and they referred to
Boo.
various digital studies. I think getting a grip on the
Yeah.
question was also mentioned, so it was just kind of like it was very close to my heart, basically.
So I just, yet again, we have to remind, we are technically scientists. And I saw this talk that was given by an editor at this scientific journal. And basically her advice was, if you think of a really good punny title, what you should do is write it down, show it to all your friends, laugh at it, and then not make that the title of the paper you submit.
I remember the Wnt genes, which are a very important family of genes in development. There was a talk that I went to in grad school, and there was someone who had done some specific knockout of the Wnt genes, and the title of the talk talks about the phenotype of like the loss. Anybody want to guess this one?
Gone with the wind.
Gone with the
Gone
Wind.
with the winds. Nice. One of my friends here actually does research into wind signaling in her lab at Cornell, and a while back the lab got mugs that said winter is coming.
That's good.
Various things like that. We like to make jokes. But yeah, so with regards to pruny fingers, so there was an idea for a long time that it's a case of osmosis where like liquid is leaving your hands into the water, and that's not true at all. It's a rumor. But actually what has been found is that putting your hands in water for a prolonged period, even if it's warm water, actually causes your blood vessels in your hands to constrict, and that results in negative pressure that then kind of like pulls the skin inward and creates wrinkles. As a consequence of this, pruny fingers could actually be an indicator of nerve function, which is pretty cool. But also is hypothesized to occur because it improves our grip and creates basically little treads that help us
Right.
hang on to stuff and also help the water that's on our hands kind of get shunted off. And the person who was interviewed for this segment was actually really cool in that one of the scientists basically looked into this by comparing the wrinkling pattern that occurs in one's fingers and toes to the topography of river systems on mountains, and basically noticed similarities in their shapes in terms of branching patterns to suggest that they are ideal for funneling water away.
Wow.
So considering that there are so many different ways that our hands and feet could wrinkle, but they wrinkle in this specific pattern that is similar to
Very
river
cool.
systems.
That's kind of the general fractal argument that there's so many ways that things could be divided, but like it's always the same ways.
Yeah. It's wild.
Another thing is that, as you mentioned, basically that our like fingers swell up like this in order to provide like a better grip on sort of wet surfaces, and that I think I can't cite the particular study. I just remember reading about this, that if you cut the nerve that goes like to your fingers, like the ulnar nerve or something, it doesn't work anymore. And that it actually is like a neurogenic response into like the sensation of wet, like a wet surface.
Interesting.
Two things I'm pretty sure are true. One is that extended exposure, you can actually desensitize. So like swimmers don't prune
Really?
particularly quickly. Whoa. Yeah, there's like a delayed response for like what would take a normal person versus like someone who spends like 4 hours a day in a pool. And the other is that it's not contact based. It's like stimulus.
Right. It is just the water.
Yeah. And so if you're
Right.
wearing like a latex glove, but you're washing the dishes, you will still get the pruning because you're perceiving the wetness of the water, even though it's not actually touching you.
Right. Okay. Question 5. So Science Friday interviewed Dr. Joshua Tewksbury, a biologist at University of Washington, Seattle, about his research on the flavorful defense mechanism employed by what plant against a microbial fungus?
About the taste that it uses to defend itself from a microbe.
Yes. So its flavor comes from a defense mechanism against this microbe. The flavor is interestingly not responsible, or not part of the defense mechanism, but rather a byproduct, at least to those of us who eat it.
I know that the smell of like freshly cut grass is like whatever's released by the grass to be like help,
Oh,
Yeah.
or something like that, or to like ward away aphids or whatever. But it's like defense mechanism.
I don't know if I can ever enjoy the smell of freshly cut grass again. It's
The
just
smell of
flare guns.
mass murder.
Hear grass like screaming in your mind.
I don't know. What could this be? Like some kind of fruit, fungus grows on it, and then it tastes better.
What's the tree? Like a mulberry tree or
So I will say it's not necessarily like you think of like a pleasant flavor of being something sweet. It's not a necessarily pleasant flavor, but people do choose to eat it.
oh.
I'll put it that way.
I have no idea.
So we're looking for an edible but not delicious tree. Is that fair to say? Or
a
bush?
plant.
Plant.
Yes.
What's the grossest spice you can think of?
Coriander. Fuck coriander.
All right, let's roll.
Whoa. Strong opinions.
Oh, I think I know. Maybe. I could be wrong. Is it possible that it's, what's that?
Cilantro?
Yeah, cilantro. Is it cilantro?
So actually cilantro and coriander are the same plant, just different parts.
Oh.
Fun fact. But it's not cilantro.
Because I know there's that thing where like certain people think that it tastes like soap.
Right.
And I was wondering if that was
gene,
like
yeah.
and
Or I think it's a
people
sniff,
choose to
actually.
eat it. I choose to eat it.
Yeah. So it's not that.
Okay.
You guys want to keep guessing, or I can just say it?
No, let's just, what do you think? Guess dunes?
Yeah, dudes.
Let's go with
Dunes.
dunes.
So I was looking for chili peppers. So I say because like
Oh.
yes.
So is that the capsaicin that it makes, or the
exactly.
Capsaicin.
So the paper that this is
Capsaicin sounds like a dog.
referencing from the journal PNAS.
The PNAS?
penis?
Ding.
Just kind of keep your hand above the bell also. Well, for subsequent questions at least. So the paper is called Evolutionary Ecology of Pungency in Wild Chilies. So basically what happens to these chilies is insects will bite their flesh to eat them, and that actually then provides like an entry point for this fungus called fusarium that can actually kill the pepper plant's seeds. So capsaicinoid chemicals that the pepper makes inhibits the growth of this fungus. And that also, of course, makes chili peppers spicy. But I will say one thing that was kind of weird to me was, okay, so here's a function for capsaicin that is completely independent of the way that it tastes, but surely that's involved somewhere as well. And it is, or rather, there's a hypothesis for that as well. And that the seeds, I should say first that capsaicin is actually detected in us by a receptor called TRPV1. Or it's like a channel, and that's how we can taste that it's really spicy. So mammals like us can taste it, and it's spicy, and it's like, oh my God, peppers. Birds do not have this receptor. So this is actually advantageous in that then like birds will, eat the seeds and then disperse them so they can germinate later. Whereas animals, because we chew them and destroy them, are less likely to actually like disperse these seeds, let them germinate. So it's not really in the chili pepper's interest for us to eat them, but it's in their interest for the birds to eat them. So that's why they're like spicy and meant to deter us. Clearly they don't, but they're totally fine for birds to eat. So that's the idea behind why capsaicin is very spicy. Anyways, all right, so question 6. Dr. Sarah Zielinski, a biologist at Duke University, was interviewed on Science Friday about her research on what creatures, sometimes referred to as chameleons of the sea.
Oh, cuttlefish.
Yeah, there's
Love me some cuttle. Guess who saw a cuttlefish with his own eyes today?
Was it you, Rob?
2 radio thumbs pointing at this guy.
2 radio thumbs.
Okay, very cool.
What kind of fish
with the
likes to
starfish?
snuggle?
Yeah, so when I got my starfish, the animal facility that we work in, there's a lab who is studying cuttlefish currently, and they're growing up a colony, and they are adorable, like 1.5 centimeter long cuttlefish.
Do you know what kind of fish likes to snuggle?
A snugglefish?
A cuttlefish.
And anglerfish, they need love. But yeah, so they are the chameleons of the sea because they can rapidly change their skin color. And this can honestly happen within a second. So they can change not only their color, but also like the pattern of their skin and the polarization of the light that reflects off of it. Even like the texture. And it's just amazing
They
what
can
these guys can do.
they can even make a chessboard. Like the
Yes.
black and white of a chessboard. If you were to
So
put them
the
on
research
air.
that I just mentioned, it was in her lab that they observed that.
Wow.
So that was like an interview with her. So they captured that. Yeah, they can kind of like mimic all sorts of crazy patterns like checkerboards. She's also observed that after they catch food, they flash bright colors.
Like, wee!
Yeah, honestly. She was like, I'm not really sure why they do this because it makes them more noticeable, but they might just be happy. Which like I definitely become brighter and more colorful after I'm fed. So, I understand that.
There's also a dubious video out there of like someone gave a cuttlefish LSD, and like I don't think that's what really happened necessarily, but it's just the cuttlefish like kind of going through like spectral like changing out
Psychedelic.
colors. Yeah.
Also of note, Science Friday has an annual cephalopod week.
Coming up!
Like cuttlefish, exactly. And it's kicking off on June 21st. It includes various gatherings and movie screenings across the country, including in NYC, where it'll be at Caveat, where we had Fax Machine Live. So check that out. Looks like a fun time.
We'll be there.
Okay.
You don't know that.
We want people to actually go to this, Rob. All right, question 7. Then 18-year-old Raul Aida was featured on Science Friday for launching a homemade shuttle built from what into space?
Is it bamboo?
No.
Okay.
It'd be cool if it was Legos.
Is it Legos? Yeah. Oh, nice.
But basically, he filled a water balloon with helium.
He's basically trying to recreate Up, but without the balloons.
Exactly.
Although it sounds like the next thing you're going to say is that he did use balloons.
Well, he did use a weather balloon, but strapped this little Lego shuttle to it. And it actually like went up 115,000 feet, which is pretty legit, with a GPS and camera attached as well, so he could track it afterwards. And he found it about 150 miles away from his launch site. So
Damn.
Wow.
pretty neat. All right, question 8, last one. A recent Science Friday segment revealed that the formation of plasma, so like ionized gas that emits heat and light, between grapes causes them to spark when you do what to them?
Put them in a microwave.
Yeah.
I never heard of this before. Is this just common knowledge?
It's a new thing. It's an internet thing.
So I'm going to be real. I have grapes and I have a microwave, and I kind of want to see this for myself.
I think we should go do that right now.
Do you want to do it?
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
want. So, are you going to explain like the somewhat questionable science behind it?
I'm going to try.
Okay.
Because it was quite over my head. But again, per penis,
Penis.
This is in quotes, this is from the abstract of the paper that corresponds to this, a popular parlor trick, which again, I was like, since when? That occurs due to the formation of, all right, so from the article, microwave photonic hotspots at the junction of aqueous dielectric spherical dimers. By the way, in this phrase, aqueous dielectrical spherical dimers are grapes. So in my vague attempt to explain this, when you put two grapes or two halves of one grape touching each other in the microwave, skin to skin, a hot spot forms at the point of contact that concentrates the microwave's electromagnetic energy and basically causes plasma to form. And the way this happens has something to do with the composition of the grapes. So because they're like hydrogels and have a lot of water, their large dielectric constant helps with this, and also their size and shape contribute in very specific ways that I just didn't understand, and everything about this was very flabbergasting to me.
We are scientists.
I am not a grape scientist, nor a microwave scientist, in my defense. So yeah, that was all I had for the quiz, but I don't know, I'm down to microwave some grapes, because I just kind of want to see this for myself.
Likewise.
That's our episode for this week. Thanks for listening, and thank you to Science Friday for being an awesome podcast and just outlet for awesome science facts, and for hosting the trivia that we went to a few weeks ago. It was so much fun, and we look
will
forward
be
to going
back
again
next year to defend our title.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. That's what we're going to do. So be sure to check us out on Instagram and Twitter at FaxMachinePod, on Facebook at Fax Machine Podcast, and at FaxMachinePodcast.com. You can also find us individually on our social medias. For me, I'm at _EM Costa. Rob?
At Whiteboard Rob.
And Noah.
At Arcs and Sciences.
And be sure to drop us a line if you have any facts that you think would be fun to talk about on the show. We would love to hear them. If you like what you heard today, do us a favor and tell a friend, leave a comment, leave a rating. It'll make us really happy, and it might make you really happy, because starting today, every week we're going to choose a random commenter or rater and give you a Fax Machine t-shirt.
Woo!
Fax Machine is produced by Rob Frawley, Noah Giberson, Emily Costa, and AC Antonelli, with editing by Noah Giberson. Sound engineering and theme music are by AC Antonelli, and our logo was designed by Mike Zola. All right, that's it for this week. Bye.